Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Association Transformation, the weekly podcast brought to you by the teams at Consort Strategy and Brewer Pratt Solutions, and always delivered in support of the Institute of Association Leadership. Regular listeners will know that I normally am co-hosting with Elisa from across in Washington, D.C., but unfortunately, Elisa can't be with me this week. I am, however, grateful that I'm joined by my other partner in crime, Cindy Sparrow, my co-host from the Good Enough for Jazz podcast. Hi, Cindy. How are you this morning?
Really well, thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
She says as she looks at the clock and it's like 7 in the morning or whatever it is. But look, we're still having a transatlantic conversation, so I'm really pleased about that. We're not really breaking the rules.
No, not at all. Not at all. And I'm happy to be here. So thanks for having me. I know in this episode, we are discussing lessons in leadership at board level, and we are focusing on a recent case study from the Institute of Directors. We all know that leadership, governance, and behavior play an important role in the success of the board and in the reputation of the organization and the members it serves. And during this pod, we're going to dive into a background review of this case study to uncover key learnings, understand how we identify and address these issues and behaviors so that they don't grow, and also be acutely aware of the impacts if we don't take action. Andrew, can you walk us through the backstory on this particular case study from 2018?
Yes, so I think before I kind of get into the detail, it's worth knowing that the Institute of Directors, for those of you who aren't in the UK, the Institute of Directors is the sort of premier membership body for directors of companies within the UK. Anybody who is from a major corporate through to a small business or micro business, can be a member, and they are very much recognised as the kind of bastion of good governance, as it were. And they're the organisation that very many people look toward, particularly in the corporate sector, to kind of look toward as their example of best practice, particularly in governance. So that kind of just sort of that background makes, I think, this podcast, this case study rather, all the more poignant, if you like. Basically, in 2018, allegations of racist, sexist, and bullying behaviour were made against the chairwoman of the Institute, Lady Barbara Judge. She was one of the UK's most senior business figures, originally from Australia. She had carved out a career in the UK. In fact, at international boardroom level, she'd carved out a career, if you like, as the kind of the consummate boardroom professional. She had a CV that was filled with honours and directorships, and she was the go-to person, if you like. If you were looking for somebody who you believed would steady the ship, give good leadership at that very, very top level, she was certainly in I would say probably your top 5 of choices of person you would want, or you would think you would want. However, so in 2018, these allegations were made to her. In fact, there were 41 allegations, which I think speaks for itself. 41 allegations were levelled against Lady Judge, and they were levelled by junior right through to senior staff across the organisation. And to name a few, because we're not going to go through all 41 allegations, but to kind of give you a sense and a flavour of what the IOD was dealing with. Some of the complaints were that she'd made derogatory comments about staff. I'm quoting directly here, including that blacks can get aggressive. She allegedly told the IOD's Director General that, and again, I went around quoting, the problem is we have one black and one pregnant woman on the IOD Secretariat, and that is the worst combination we could possibly have.
Unreal.
It is unreal. In fact, I'm kind of feeling a bit embarrassed.
It's hard to say those things out loud, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It just sounds so wrong. I mean, she then went on and said, she claimed that long maternity breaks are bad, and she suggested women who took a year off would be at risk of losing their jobs. She allegedly bullied her assistant, who suffered continual mental anguish, and she was accused of using her position for personal gain and profit because she used IOD.
This was the fashion show at the Chinese embassy for her own fashion line, wasn't it? And
it was
IOD
indeed.
staff.
She used IOD staff to organise a show for her fashion range. Oh, I'm not laughing. I am. And she put pressure. I mean, I think this for me is a significant one. She put pressure on the facilities manager at the IOD to hire a company that was associated with her son for outfitting or refurbishing the IOD offices. Now, that tender had already been awarded to another company, and yet she exerted pressure for the IOD to change their mind. So basically, that's what happened. They went through a significant investigation, internal and in fact external investigation. Lady Judge resigned from the board. The matter was widely publicised across all the all the broadsheets, and the results were massive. Not least the decline of their reputation, but also, in terms of profit and turnover, in the following year, 2019, their profits were down by 4.2 million. Now, not all of that was to do with this governance scandal, quite frankly, but it was certainly a big chunk of it. I think was to do with people's confidence in the organisation's leadership, and certainly, as it reported, probably one of the worst, if not the worst year in its 116-year history. And like I say, she resigned as chair, and the director general also had to quit their post. So all in all, if you didn't know about it before, your eyes would just be boggling right now, thinking, I can't quite believe this was the IOD. And certainly that was the
Honestly,
sense. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, sorry. Certainly that was the sense when these things were because I've just laid it all out there, but this was coming out in dribs and drabs over a number of weeks in the papers. So certainly it just seemed to be a drama that kept unfolding.
and
It was a
those of
nice
us who
distraction. It was a nice distraction from Brexit. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
no, it was a distraction from Brexit, right? That was only just a
Yeah,
few years ago,
yeah.
right? I just when you think of all of like 41 allegations, and you've got somebody who's in a senior leadership role on a board, and they've got a career of being on boards, it's astonishing to think that this kind of behavior can get to that level and happen, but yet it does. It does in organizations everywhere. And why do you think, Andrew, that this behavior on boards in particular, where there should be checks and balances, can be allowed to grow to the level that it does? What do we think was happening that was stopping it from being curbed early on? I mean, I have some
Well,
ideas, but I'm curious what you think.
yeah. I mean, I think fundamentally, well, I don't know which order to put this in. I think fundamentally, culture at the board level was clearly fundamentally flawed. It obviously wasn't a healthy board environment. She was basically riding roughshod over organizational decision making. She clearly felt that she was in a, well, arguably, with expressing views like she was, an untouchable position, and it points to, I think, a cultural issue amongst the board where they didn't recognize themselves as part of the organization's leadership team.
Right.
And it points to, I think, a scenario where there was a distinct lack of trust around the board table, arguably a lack of respect around the board table. The fact that it was happening at all, I mean, it should only have happened once. Never mind, 41 allegations,
I
all of
know.
that just points to, I think, so I think it's a cultural issue. I think it also points to arguably the board not really fully appreciating or understanding or wanting to understand and adhere to its role and responsibilities.
I was
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. I mean, not understanding that actually it's their responsible to not only get in the way and stop this behavior from happening, that there needs to be accountability and that they own that role. They're actually obligated to do something about it, perhaps. I mean, and I don't know. It's easy to target the Institute of Directors when I don't know their backstory. Were there policies and procedures in place that made sure that this stuff didn't happen? I think we've talked before about sometimes you get that board culture where we have to listen to what the chair says. The chair is in charge of everything.
Yeah.
When truly we are all in a position at the board table where we're collectively responsible for the success of this organization, and sometimes we just defer that power over to someone else because maybe we came onto the board and you're right. The culture is such that no, that's how we do it here, and don't you dare question, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Gets us into hot water.
And if that latterly was that latter point you make about this is how we do things here, if that was the case, and she stepped into that environment and adhered to that environment with the way she was behaving, well, then that's just a massive. That just demonstrates something far bigger. But I'm not certain. I don't think that was the case with the IOD. I think she actually. I think it probably was a case that the culture within the boardroom wasn't strong. It certainly wasn't collegiate, and I think it probably pointed, as I say, to people's misunderstanding or unwillingness to engage at the proper level as members of the board. But I certainly think, she, with the pedigree that she arguably came with, the resume that she rocked up with, I can imagine a scenario where people probably felt quite intimidated.
Absolutely.
By Lady Judge. But that actually, is in itself just demonstrates again to a complete weakness. Quite frankly, a weakness in her leadership style as well, because she obviously wasn't a collaborative leader. Or certainly that's the sense I get, is that she couldn't, or if she was a collaborative leader, then the rest of the board were, quite frankly, massively out of their depth and shouldn't have been there in the first place. So, it was all fundamentally wrong from the get-go. Yeah. And I think, more importantly, you can't have culture. You can't instill a culture of, good, constructive, collaborative leadership if people aren't given proper training.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And clearly, you're right. This isn't an organization where that was existing when. Some of that may have existed to a degree when she joined, but clearly people weren't willing to continue to put up with it because there were 41 allegations against her. So people did come forward eventually when they thought this isn't right and we don't know what to do. But we work a lot with organizations and boards delivering governance training, really talking about that level of trust that's required on a board, so that we and that everybody has a say and input, and we have to have everybody's sets of eyes on the policy and procedure that we have in place. The training that we have is so incredibly important, so we understand what our role is and what scope we work within, so that we can make sure that things like these don't happen. Yeah. And also operate really successfully, right? So having those rules of engagement and those clear expectations, building that team trust and holding one another accountable and making sure that we're, taking action and making decisions that are for the greater good, and they don't become individualized, self-fulfilling kind of things that have nothing to do. Because ultimately, Institute of Directors, they're a massive organization trying to do right by their members. And this is really a black mark on their record where they won't, it will take them a while to overcome that. And it's based on the actions of one. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and this is an organization that actually has a governance function that is, I would suggest is significantly well resourced compared to, other membership entities. They have governance specialists within the staff. So they're not left for wanting in terms of having. And in fairness to them, they don't ever seem to fall into that management board model where they get obsessed by the kind of day-to-day detail of operations, but neither were they really able to fulfill, their strategic or their generative functions because, and I always find it so frightening because, one dominant personality walks in the door and just tips everything on his head. One question I've got actually when I think about it and I reflect about it is, do we think, given Lady Judge's background and where she'd come from and, the time, the era, if you like, in terms of when she had sort of started her career, do you think gender had a role to play in how she was behaving? And I don't mean that she was behaving badly because she was a woman, but I mean, do we think because she has, I would suggest, had to probably fight to prove herself
Mm-hmm.
in the boardroom environment, certainly of the 70s and 80s,
Mm-hmm.
probably in the 90s, actually. I mean, I think I wondered if she was almost sort of overcompensating. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. That is a real thing. There is certain types of bias that happen that would make us show up in a way so that we can kind of assimilate to other behavior, right? So it's true. There's like the competence likability trade-off where I can either be competent or liked, but not both. And so
Yeah.
maybe she went down the role of, well, I'm competent and you'll respect my authority type of behavior. It could be too that the era that she grew up in. So we are we've evolved as humans in a lot of places. There's, we have ED&I
Yeah.
programs in our organizations because we want to make sure that those kinds of statements aren't made. When people have those sets of beliefs and they go unchallenged and unchecked, it colors the way they make decisions and how they influence other people's well-being and outcome, right? I mean, she's in charge of people who are on the secretariat and she says
Mm,
those things about them. That's
mm,
pretty powerful stuff, right?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
so she's, I mean, I think she made a comment too. I was reading that, women who are on maternity leave shouldn't be taking all of that time off. It's not good for their careers, right? And that there'd be
Mm,
consequences if they did.
mm,
And she, a
mm,
woman herself who's had children, is seeing things from a lens where, yeah, maybe she worked in a male dominated world where she constantly had to make sure she removed herself from that seemingly weak position of you can't have time off and it's going to look bad for the rest of us, so I have to make sure I remove myself from that and be very stern about it. I mean, yeah, they're probably, it's easy to armchair quarterback from where we're at, and
yeah.
hindsight's 2020. There are probably a number of factors that contributed to her developing beliefs and showing up that way. I'm not making excuses because it's not, the
No,
behavior's not
no,
okay,
no.
and those allegations, a lot of them were found to be true. I mean, and she
Yes, they
resigned.
were. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
she resigned before they had a chance to really go through the entire process. But a lot of them were found to be true, and there were multiple reports of the same types of behavior from a number of different people.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and so I think that when that behavior is ingrained and it doesn't go in check, I'm thinking right away of the work that we do with organizations all the time on governance training, making sure
Yeah.
that,
Mm,
the board really understands what their role is, that they have, we do audits to make sure that they've got all of the policy and procedure in check and in place so that they're able to function and avoid things like this, because this just is so damaging, not only to the organization but to the team and any work that you've done and progress that you've made. And it gets put under a microscope, and it just is downright yucky, and nobody wants to be a part of that.
no, and I think it's really I want to sort of I want to be clear here. We're making look. Lady Judge wasn't the only bad guy in this scenario here, in this situation. I don't want to put all the blame on. Obviously her behaviour was unacceptable, and had she not resigned, then I think she should have been and would have been fired from
Mm-hmm.
the position. But and actually, it wasn't just her views on people that were deplorable. Actually, it was her view of what constitutes ethical business practice,
Mm-hmm.
which is questionable as well. And so I think she was clearly, I think, at that stage. Not the right fit for any organisation.
Mm-hmm.
However, what I don't want to do is absolve the rest of the board and the rest of the organisation from its responsibility as well. And I think you're right. One of the things we spend a lot of time when we're in boardrooms with people is we spend a lot of time explaining that what we want culture and values and leadership style to transcend changes in personnel. We want to
Mm-hmm.
get to the point where one personality doesn't walk into the room, and which is clearly, and as you know, I've experienced that personally, and I've seen it many times. An
Mm-hmm.
individual rocks up, next thing you know, the whole world is upside down because they've not put in place appropriate. They've not even discussed it. They've not even agreed what
Yeah.
appropriate operating protocol are for the board. And so I think this is a shared responsibility. I mean, yes,
Mm-hmm.
um, she is the dominant sort of protagonist in this play, but actually there are many supporting actors on this stage, and they were
Mm-hmm.
all culpable in some degree. For the board, the fact that 41 allegations came from staff,
Mm-hmm.
and the board had, not publicly, we have no evidence to suggest that the board publicly or otherwise challenged what was going on internally, suggests to me so many relationship issues
Mm-hmm.
that were permeating across that organization's senior leadership team. Um, yeah, I just think it's really important that we recognise that everybody at board level has that responsibility to ensure that the governance focus, the governance practices, are correct. And clearly, in this scenario, they didn't. And I really, and quite frankly, in my own personal opinion, after this debacle, I would have expected the entire board to stand down immediately, because there's no integrity in staying on. Quite frankly, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we said earlier in the show was, it's the culture becomes, it's the way we do things around here. Well, if you've got good practice and process in place,
Exactly.
and you've got the trust and accountability on
Exactly.
board,
Yeah.
then the way we do things around here will turn out for everyone's
Yeah.
best, you know? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, in terms of I'm just thinking, when I reflect on where they were at, I mean, of course, we'll never
Mm-hmm.
really get to the bottom of Lady Judge's view of the world, because, I mean, unfortunately, she passed away in August 2020. So
Hmm.
we no longer have the opportunity to interview her, um, to get a better sense of where in the world she was coming from, as it were. But certainly, we are able to determine what the kind of costs are to that organization, the
Yeah.
costs of not having in place, you know, sufficient, it doesn't even need to be innovative governance practice, just
Mm-mm.
sufficient governance
Mm-hmm.
practice.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously that damaged reputation and the loss of trust in the organization.
Which
We
takes
spend
such, yeah, and I mean, it's
Yeah,
tough to, sure, you can measure that in dollars at, what was it, 4.2
four
million
point two
pounds
million pounds. Yeah,
in a year of loss, and we understand that may not all be based on this particular incident, but we know that some of it is. But aside from the financial impacts, the loss in revenue, that loss of member trust and a damaged reputation takes a long time to overcome. You can make more money, but it
yeah,
takes a
yeah,
long time to restore that trust, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly, exactly.
absolutely. And truly, it reflects on the entire board.
Mm,
Even if maybe there was only a few key people that we're in, I don't
yeah.
want to write the story because it's really
No.
easy to just
Yeah, yeah.
shoot arrows at everybody. But it reflects on the entire board. It's everybody's responsibility to address this behavior. And it sounds like it went unchecked for quite some time before it got out of hand and staff started to lodge complaints.
Yeah.
Right? So when you think of something at that magnitude, it may be hard for them to ever recover. Now, Institute of Directors, I think they're quite large, and they do a lot of business, and they have a lot of members. So for an organization of that
Yeah,
significance,
yeah. They
they'll
they'll be
they'll
fine.
they'll be fine.
Yeah,
But some smaller membership based organizations who are doing some really good work, if this happens at their table, they may never ever recover. And what a shame to not be able to put their good work out into the world for their members, right? For people who
absolutely.
actually need it, and because it wasn't managed in a way that it could be curbed quickly.
And for all those people who are involved,
Mm-hmm.
even if those who are kind of on the periphery at board level,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of the memory of this, if you like, will follow them through their careers.
Yeah.
And there are very many career non-executive directors
Mm-hmm.
who see value in adding to the mission and the vision of a non-profit. However, people aren't going to want to necessarily engage with them if they can see evidence that actually they've not added value, and in fact they've taken value away from either their action or their inaction at board level. So I think the costs are significant, but the lessons learned, I think, should be even more significant, which is fundamentally just invest in your board's professional development. I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about, as organizations, spend a lot of time talking about CPD for staff because, we're spending money on these people. We want to make sure that they're doing the right thing and they're getting, we're getting value out of them and that they're actually delivering for our members. And then we forget that to do the same at board level just because these people are voluntary. The reality is that kind of volunteering concept stops at the door as far as I'm concerned. Once you're at the table, you're and particularly as you are the legally accountable body for the success or otherwise of the organization.
Absolutely.
So therefore it's as imperative, if not more so, that you are given proper induction. And by induction, you know that I don't just mean, this is what the balance sheet looked like and these are the kind of this is what the strategic plan looks like. It's like, it's so much more fundamental than that. It's about, yes, it's about the mechanics, but it's also very much about the dynamics of what constitutes governance, because we expect our boards, some boards are convening, quarterly, 3 hours. That's like 12 hours a year.
A year. That's not very much time at all.
I mean, we expect them to be high-performing teams, walking in the door, making strategic decisions, having a grasp on what is the organization's reality.
And they don't even barely know each other. If they haven't gelled as a team, then it is really tough to do that.
Exactly.
You're playing that game where you're like, I don't want to misstep. There's always the dynamics of the board where that person's been here longer than me. Should I have a say? I don't know what, if you establish that from the very beginning, which is what we spend a lot of time doing with a lot of boards, is making sure that element of humanism is infused into it. We're not just people showing up at a table to make decisions 4 times a year. We're a team that connects all the way through the year and is strong, has trust. Yeah.
So that's my kind of conclusion to it, is that the IOD, and I know they are now. Let's be clear. I know that they do, and they've been, in fairness to the IOD, they've been transparent in how they've followed up from this scandal. They've not allowed anything to be swept under the carpet. They have made sure that everybody understands, they are in what's happened, and they are investing in their board. So you can't fault them for that. It's just a shame it got to that in the first place.
That's right.
But I'm sure the colleagues at the IOD would want other non-profits to benefit from their experience. So hopefully today's listeners will take something away from this. We'll take it back to their boardroom. If you just take one thing from, in my opinion, if you just take one thing from it, it is invest in professional development that focuses on mechanics and dynamics of successful non-profit governance.
Absolutely. Okay, Andrew. If people wanted to get more information on where they could do that, the IAL website.
Yes, so you can visit www.ial.org, or you can always take a look at the Console Strategy website, or the Brewer Pratt Solutions website. It's all available, and drop us a line. You can always email us, hello@yourconsort.com, or you can tweet us at Console Strategy.
Perfect.
Okay, so thank you very much for joining me this week, Cindy. I appreciate you standing in at relatively short notice, but I'm glad we were still able to have our transatlantic conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
And if you've enjoyed listening to our musings this week, then as I said, no, I didn't say actually. No, I said it last time I was concluding the podcast. You can find us you can find Association Transformation on all of the major platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify. We're there. With Amazon, we're on everything. And if you've got a subject you want us to discuss, or indeed if you want to join us on the podcast, then as I say, email us hello@yourconsort.com, or you can tweet us at Console Strategy or at Association Transformation. So until next week, everybody keep safe, keep well, and keep putting your mission and your members first. Association Transformation is brought to you in partnership between Consult Strategy and Brewer Pratt Solutions in support of the Institute of Association Leadership.